Hey everybody, and welcome to another aesthetic imaging video tutorial. Today we're going to be taking some modern day footage and we're going to be doing this to it. So we're going to be taking this footage and turning it into old World War I footage. An approximation of it, at least. Now, it helps to have footage that kind of fits within this area. And I would say that this is footage that I purchased from Pond 5. It's of a World War II reenactment. And yeah, I know that's different than World War I, but the same techniques kind of apply. But what I want to point out here, so everybody's looking pretty legit. They got their tanks and their guns, but what is going on with this guy right here? What is this? What happened here? But then you got this bright green camo pajama pants, basically. I just want to know what happened in this situation where he had all of his gear except for his pants. All right, so like I said, what we're going to be doing is turning this modern day footage into what would be an approximation of extremely old footage, kind of like a reverse Peter Jackson. Now, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Peter Jackson is a director. He's the guy that did Lord of the Rings. A couple of years ago, maybe last year, he made a documentary called They Shall Never Grow Old. And it's a documentary about World War I. And there's a behind the scenes, I think BBC. I'll find it and leave a link in the description. You can watch it. What this documentary did is it took old footage that looked like this and they colorized it and made it look pretty modern. So how I came up with this technique with all these different effects that we're putting on here is I actually just reverse engineered the things that they discussed, and I also kind of paid attention to what makes old footage look like old footage and the fundamentals of it and the kind of elements that cause it to look the way it does. And each one of these is a representation of old footage and an element of old footage. So we have our black and white, we have our hairs, and then we have a blur, which that effect right there really brings it in for old footage. Because when there's a lot of high contrast areas, there's a fuzziness that always seems to appear on the film. So we got a posterize time, and this is going to play it back at a certain frame rate that is different to what the footage was shot in. And we're going to add a flicker. You can see that turning on and off. And we're going to add a color grade, which kind of brings it into the dynamic range that old film had. And of course, we're going to add a vignette. And we're going to add some grain. All right, so let's get started on creating this effect. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to right click on our footage here. All right, let's bring this to 100% or fit up to 100. So we're going to right click on our footage here, go up to time, go to enable time remapping. All right, so the only thing we're going to do with this time remap is we're going to alt click on the stopwatch here, and we're going to type in wiggle parentheses 3, 0.05. Now this is going to be the first number right here. There you go. The first number right here, that is the frequency or the amount of times per second. And the last number is the amount. So when we play this back, it's going to be pretty subtle, but you can hear it in the audio. So what it's doing is it's basically, as it's playing back, it's kind of like speeding up and then slowing down and then speeding up, slowing down. It's a variable frame rate. Because in the olden days with cameras, like in World War I setting, they had to be hand cranked. All right, so one thing we're going to do here is we're going to turn off our audio because there was no audio. Also, if you leave the audio on, it just sounds weird. All right, so what this time remapping is doing, again, it's kind of going and then like slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. So variable frame rate, got it. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to add a posterized time. So posterized time, oh, not that one. There we go. It's under time, posterized time. And we're going to set this to 20. But then we're also going to alt-click on the stopwatch, and we're going to type in another wiggle. Quiet thunder. And this one we're going to do timing of 1 time per second and 15. Now on top of the, the time remapping slowing and speeding up, we're also having it play back in a different frame rate. Now this step, play around with these numbers and stuff like that to get the kind of look that you want. It's kind of finicky, and sometimes it just might not look right at all. All right, so that's our first step here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this footage and we're going to hit Shift-Command-C to pre-compose it. And we'll just call this footage. And make sure that Move All Attributes is selected. Hit OK, and there you go. Now on top of this, we're going to add a tint. So Effects and Presets, and it's under Color Correction, Tint. We're going to add that. That's all we're doing for that. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to right-click down here, go to New Adjustment Layer. And we're going to call this Blur. Woohoo! All right, so we're going to type in Fast Box Blur. It's under Blur and Sharpen. We're going to add that onto our adjustment layer. And we're going to turn on Repeat Edge Pixels. And we're going to set this to 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the modes here. And if you don't see it, you can go to Toggle Switches and Modes. And we're going to set this to Overlay. So what this is doing, it's blurring everything, but it's really kind of only showing up in the bright spots and the dark spots. And if you notice on old footage, really dark spots with high contrast, like this area right here, there's always this like fuzziness. So that's what this accomplishes. So now we're going to actually create a new solid. We're going to call this Blur Matte. Make sure it's the comp size. Hit OK. Doesn't really matter what color you make it. We're going to hit OK. And on this, we're going to put on a fractal noise. All right. It's under Noise and Grain, Fractal Noise. We're going to add that onto our solid here. And for the contrast, we're going to turn this down to something like 42. And the brightness, we're going to turn up as well to 42. Close to that. We're just getting a little blotches of white patches here. And then a gray. Complexity, we're going to turn down. There we go. Something like that. Give it a more little fuzziness look to it. And then we're going to come down to evolution. And we're going to alt-click on the stopwatch. And we're going to type in an expression, time, times, and we'll do 150. So now we have this going on. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take our blur. And we're going to set the track matte to Luma Matte, Blur Matte. Now we're going to add a posterized time. So we're going to go to New Adjustment Layer. And we're going to go up to Effects and Presets. And we're going to type in Posterized Time. Here we go. Posterized Time. It's under time. And we're just going to add that on top. I'm going to set this to 12. Now anything below it will play back at 12 frames per second. All right, so we're going to rename our adjustment layer to Posterize Time. There we go. Nailed it. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a flicker, because in old footage, the footage flickers a lot, you know, brightness and darkness. So we're going to add another adjustment layer. And this time we're going to add a brightness and contrast. Color correction, brightness, and contrast. All right, so we have our brightness and contrast on. So let's just turn up our brightness a bit. 10 looks fine, right? You don't want too much. Like, you don't want to have it be like that, because that's just too much, you know? So we'll set this back to 10. And in contrast, we'll bring this kind of way down to about there. You can see what that's doing. All right, we're going to turn that back on, and we're going to name this layer Flicker. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit T to bring up the opacity. All right, so under opacity, we're going to Alt-click on the stopwatch, and we're going to type in wiggle. And we're going to do timing of 20 and the amount 50. So that means 20 times a second, our flicker is going to be flickering on and off by a factor of 50. So if it's at 100%, it'll go between 50 and 100. Now we can see what that is doing right there. So we got our flicker going on. I could probably even turn this up a bit. Maybe 20. All right, so now you can see what that's doing. We got our little flicker coming in. We're getting there. We're working on it. All right, so the next step is to add some hairs. So we're going to right-click down in here, go to New, Solid. We're going to call this Hairs. And on top of that, we're going to add a fractal noise. There we go, noise and grain, fractal noise. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our contrast here, and we're going to bump that up to about 230. And then we're going to take the brightness and turn that up a bunch as well to maybe like 65. Something like that. And complexity, we're going to turn up way up there to 9. Now we want to go into transform here, and we want to uncheck this uniform scaling. So scale width, we're going to bring all the way down to 1, just like that. And scale height, we're going to scale way up to about 2000-ish. So now we have these vertical lines. So what we can do is add turbulent displace, and that's under distort, turbulent displace. And you can see we're already starting to get these little wavy lines. So for the amount, we're going to turn up to something like that. And size, we're going to leave at 100 actually. And we're going to turn up the complexity. Something like that. And we're starting to get these little wavy lines here. Oh, yes. And I almost forgot. Under evolution, under fractal noise, we're going to Alt-click on the stopwatch and add a time expression. And this one's going to be really fast, 400. All right, so now if we play this back, we get this crazy just jumping around mess. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take our turbulent displace here. We're going to hit Command D to duplicate it. And for this one, we're going to turn down the amount. And turn down the size. Whole bunch here. Something like that. And we're going to turn the complexity up. So now we have our wavy lines. And what we want to do is we're going to add another posterize time. Let's close these up. Come back to effects and presets and posterize time. And this one we're going to set to 15. All right, so on top of everything here, we're also going to add a fast box blur. So blur and sharpen, fast box blur, repeat edge pixels, and we're just going to set this to 1. All right, so now that's it for our hairs. And we're going to set this to multiply. Now we don't want our hairs everywhere. So what we want to do is create a matte for that. So let's go to New, Solid, and we're going to call this Hairs Matte. Hit OK. And we're going to add a fractal noise. And for this, we're going to go absolutely mental with the contrast here. Just turn that way up. As you can see, we're starting to get little patches of white and black, not much in between. Brightness, we're going to turn down. So we're just basically trying to get little patches of white coming in here. Transform, we're going to turn this way up. Turn up the scale. Something like that. And we'll even turn down the complexity here. And under evolution, we're going to do another time times, and we're going to do 400. Now we have this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another posterize time and change this to 15. Now you see as it moves, it kind of like sticks for a couple frames and then keeps moving on. So now that we're done with that, let's take this hairs layer and let's set the track matte to Lumimatte Hairs Matte. Now we only have it visible, the hairs visible in certain areas. That's a little much. So we can actually hit T. You want more subtlety with this, you know? So what we're going to do is we're going to select both these layers and we're going to pre-compose them. And we're going to call this Hairs Comp. Hit OK. Now you notice, now we got this weird, we got kind of like this white showing up along with the hairs, and we don't want that. What we can do is go back to toggle switches and modes, and we can click on this little gear box right here. And that'll bring whatever settings that this is set to. So this will be set to multiply. But when you pre-compose that, that multiply won't show up in your main comp. So you need to hit on this, which is the collapse transformations. So we click on that, and now we have our multiply back, even though it's in a different composition. All right, we're getting there. So we're going to take this hairs comp and we're going to move it down right above our footage and below everything else. So that way the blur and stuff will get added on top of that, and it'll just kind of pull it into your footage more. So we got our flicker, we got our variable frame rate, we have our hairs, we have our blur, our posterized time. All right, so we're going to click on our flicker here, and we're going to add a new adjustment layer. And we're going to call this color grade. And for this, we're just going to add a curves, color correction curves. Drop that right on there. And we want to lower our dynamic range. We want to kind of get rid of the high points and the dark points here. So we're going to bring this down to about there. And we're going to bring this up to about there, about here. But then we're also going to create a little S curve. So we're going to bring this down, but bring this up. See how that's working out there. Now we're getting some nice contrast, but we never have a pure white spot and we never have a pure black spot. just like that. All right, now we get to this really fun part, our vignette. So we're going to right click down here. We're going to go to New, Solid. Now, what I'm about to do is a little bit crazy. At some point, I'm going to speed up the footage. I saw this technique actually watching Aaron Nace at Flern, which is a photography channel. And I really liked it. And I've actually never tried it in After Effects until this point in time. Well, I mean, besides when I did the run through. And I had no idea how it was going to work or how it was going to look. I mean, you'll see what I'm talking about once I get started here. All right, so we're going to take our pen tool and we're just going to click here and we're going to go like this. We're going to come over and we're just going to randomly kind of go like this. Around the, try not to remove points. Here we go. And we're just going to randomly go around, make sure that the mask is intersecting with itself. Just random points all around. Maybe come over to here, pull this out there, come over here, all the way back, go back around. All right. And this is going to take some time to do. Man, I didn't even accidentally click this much when I was doing it the first time. Right. And we're just going to keep on doing this. All right, now that's done. And this is what we have. We have this weird intersection of the mask where parts of it clips out and becomes invisible while other parts are visible. So what we're going to do, we're going to go hit M on the keyboard. M, not N. M for mask. We're going to set this to subtract. All right, so we have this dark border with randomness in between. Randomness. I added another S syllable to random. Randomness in between. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a fast box blur. So fast box blur, blur and sharpen. We're going to add that onto our black solid. And let's real quick name this Vignette Matte. That's a weird word, by the way. And we're going to turn up, well, we're going to hit repeat edge pixels, and then we're going to turn up our mask. We're going to hit Shift Command H here to get rid of our actual view of the mask, and we're going to just turn this up. Now you notice what this is creating now is this completely random kind of little blotchiness. So, I mean, what we could have done was just add an ellipse, you know, and use that as the mask. But we want to create this crazy random shape. It gives it a more organic feel. All right, so now that we have that set up, let's go to our color grade here, or the one just below our vignette matte, and let's create a adjustment layer. And again, make sure that's underneath your vignette matte. We're going to call this vignette. And we're going to add a curves. Boom. And we're just going to pull this down like so. Go over to the track matte, and we're going to set this to alpha matte. Now we can adjust the darkness of our vignette. And we'll make it pretty dark like that. Maybe bring down... So now we see we have these kind of patches rather than a complete like circle that looks like it was just computer generated. All right, so that's our vignette. And now the last step here, if I go into my project window open up our assets, there's this, let's check this out here. Check it out. Set this to full. Go to beginning. We have this film grain. And this is actual real film grain. All right, so this is called Gorilla Grain, and it's a free asset that they supply. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can pick it up. I use it all the time. Now it is 720, and our footage is 1080. So let's just drop this down on top of here, and we're gonna hit S for scale, and we're just gonna set this to 150, which will make it 1080 by, or 1920 by 1080. All right, so under our mode, we want to switch this to overlay. Now for this, I actually want to up it a bunch so we can duplicate it, Command D, and just really give it a lot of grain. I mean, this is old footage. As you can see, like, this footage is looking pretty old. It looks pretty authentic. And of course, our grain doesn't really go to the whole comp, so we can duplicate that, and then we can hit Command open bracket, or close bracket rather, to bring them to the top, and then we can just drag that, and if we hold down Shift, it'll snap it to the end of this. All right, so I'm going to take all of these, and I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to pre-compose them into a new comp here. All right, so that's the tutorial. Hopefully you guys learned something. And once again, I would like to reiterate that the purpose of this tutorial was not really genuinely to show you how to do all these things, how to make all this stuff. The real purpose of this tutorial was to teach you to kind of think about the effects that you're trying to create and to break them down into their fundamentals, to make them so you can understand how the things work that you're trying to create. And that is pretty much what this channel is about. Because, I mean, it's nice to learn how to do certain things, but you're not going to find a tutorial on everything, is what I've learned. And the best way to make your own way and come up with your own effects is to really study the fundamentals of what you're trying to create. You know, think about its movement, think about why the footage looks the way it does. You know, what causes the flicker, what causes the hairs, what causes, you know, the grain, what causes the variable frame rate. That's the kind of stuff you should be thinking about when you're creating effects on your own. Anyway, so, yep, learn, apply, and grow, and I'll see you next time.